Hi, everyone. Welcome to another book discussion with the Ann Arbor District Library that's facilitated by the Unerased Book Club. Tonight, we are discussing The Right Swipe, and this is by Alisha Rai, and it's going to be a fun one to discuss. Before we start, why don't we quickly introduce ourselves? I will start. I'm Lucy, and I work at the library. I'm a library tech, and I work in the youth department, but I do programming for all ages. I'm a middle-aged woman with shoulder-length brown hair, and I'm sitting in a room with some watercolors and a red table behind me.
Okay, I can go next. I'm Krista, and I work for the Ann Arbor Library as a desk clerk, and I work at all of the branches for the most part. I'm a white female in my late 30s, and my hair is short, and you can't really see it, but it is blue. It's just in a ponytail, so you can't really see it. And I have a wall of books behind me.
Cool. Hi, folks. I'm Fatema. I am Bangladeshi, South Asian woman, brown skin, slightly long black hair with a digital background, blurred background. And I am one of the facilitators for the Unerased Book Club.
And hey everyone, I'm Sheela. I'm the founder and co-facilitator of Unerased Book Club with Fatema. I'm a South Asian Indian woman in her early 30s with short shoulder-length hair with a digital background behind me, and unfortunately poor window lighting, so I'm a little bit obfuscated by that. And before we get started on this conversation, which I'm really excited for, just want to give a quick summary. This is the first romance novel that the book club has read, and we've been around for 4 years. We're really excited to open up our genres, but it's a romance novel focusing on a Black American female and a Samoan American man. And the context is the female protagonist is named Rihanna, is the founder of a popular dating app, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, I'm sure. And the Samoan American man is a retired football player, and there's a lot of stuff to delve into with that as well. So I'm excited, and I'll just open it up. How do you guys feel about this book?
I loved it. I do really enjoy romances, especially modern ones that have sort of more stronger independent women, I would say. I actually have never done dating apps, but a lot of my friends do, so I'm familiar with them. But so I did actually have to Google, because I was like, this is based on something that I'm just not getting. So I did have to Google Bumble.
Nice.
Well, yeah, I also, go ahead.
No, please.
I was just saying, I loved it too. I thought it was really fun to read, but like Krista said, I enjoyed that the female protagonist was so strong and independent. And I think all the characters were actually really well developed, and they all had some different storylines that were interesting. So yeah, I thought it was great. And I didn't know about Bumble at all. So
I actually struggled with the beginning of this book. So the first quarter, about 25%, was really hard for me because I was like, when is the action going to take place? We're just rehashing something that happened before the start of the book, and we're not getting to anything. But then the rest of the book really picked up, and I was so pleased by the depth of the discussion, because it takes on some pretty heavy topics and handles it with a lot of maturity and grace, which I appreciated a lot. And I am familiar with the whole, Bumble and everything else that was going on. So I was like, oh, these are just, stand-ins for these other apps. And it was fun to read. So I was curious about the author's background and how she decided to focus on this particular story at all.
And I actually met my husband on Tinder. So apps can work, I guess. And his whole thing with the books that we normally select are, they're always dark or there's something sad about them. And I was like, no, we're reading a romance novel. And Fatema was with me when I was saying this. And I was like, wait, I actually cried during this book. And he's like, see, something has to be up with all the books you do. And the whole subplot around CTE, or traumatic brain injuries found in football players primarily, really got to me. And I wasn't expecting that in a romance novel. And Krista, you were saying, I think as we were starting this call, that this book was on a bunch of different book club newsletters, or just newsletters that you subscribe to. And I'm really curious how those avenues like framed this book, because we came at it from an Asian American Pacific Islander lens. I'm just curious how other people were thinking about it.
I think a lot of the lists and things I found were sort of selling it as a like enemies to lovers kind of thing, which is like a friend of mine, that's like all she reads. That's her favorite kind of romance, is all she wants to read. Which I don't know if I would necessarily put it in that category, but I can see where marketing it, they might do that.
Yeah, I would also, I don't think this is an enemies to lovers at all. There's just none of the usual. So I think one of the things that I really love about romance as a genre are the tropes and playing into tropes. And I think I love a good movie, a good, romance movie. I love a good romance book that actually just picks their trope and does it really well. This was not enemies to lovers. This was, I feel like there should be a category for the one night stand that you go back to, right? Or,
or like poor communication to communication, which I really felt was the crux of their issues.
It really was, through the very end. So yeah, but that's interesting. Yeah.
I also really liked what was it, CTE? Is that what it was? I thought that was really interesting. I was not expecting to find that in a romance novel. But I often do find unexpected things like that are kind of brought to light like through romance. And I was aware of it just from kind of in passing, reading it in the newspaper and things. But that was interesting and also really, really cool to highlight that.
I'm curious. Sorry, please, Lucy.
I was just saying, one of the things I think that was really powerful about that storyline, besides the fact that it was talking about this really heavy subject, I mean, and for Samson, really difficult because of his family members and how he stood up against it. But I think that, like in a lot of books, there can be this idealized, falling in love with a professional athlete, or the woman dating the professional athlete. And I think to be writing about an ex-professional athlete and then to be showing like, here is something that also can happen if you play football. It's not all about fame and glory. And so I thought that in addition to like introducing this topic that, I learned about from this book too, it sort of subverted the whole, oh, he's an athlete kind of thing. So I thought that was powerful.
Yeah, I was really thinking a lot about all the TV shows that have been based around that, whether it's reality shows or like, I think there was like a sitcom that was called The Game or something about basketball players and just all the shows that we've had where athletes have been the focus and the woman in their lives. And I thought this was such a different take on it, about someone who chose to retire out of his values and out of and to stand up for something, and was struggling with that, with all the questions of like, what's next, and what do I do with my time, and how do I make sense of all the grief, and about the cost of being an athlete in this way. So I appreciated that depth.
I was curious if anybody here reads romance as like a primary genre, and if you do, how do you see, especially in romance novels that center heterosexual romances, how often do you see male characters fleshed out in a complicated way like this?
Not very. but also you do get both characters' perspectives, and you don't always see that. It's usually one character or the other. So he was definitely fleshed out in a way that if it had only been from her perspective, you would have missed so much about him. So I'm glad that it wasn't. I'm glad it did include both.
I don't really read romance novels very much. I will occasionally read them, but I've read a lot of fanfic over the years, and a lot of fanfic is basically romance novels, right? And I think in those cases, I have seen them explore some really deep issues, and also all the tropes. I think my familiarity with tropes comes along that way, but no, I'm not a typical romance reader at all. And so this was surprising.
Yeah, I have recently been reading more romance. It wasn't something I always did read. And I think that there seems to be this variety that's being presented more recently. And I've read some really good things where the characters were not what is normally, I think, presented in romance or expected. Like I think of like Casey McQuiston's books, like Red, White, and Royal Blue, and they have a new one out called I Kissed Shara Wheeler. And then I read a series of books by Talia Hibbert about the Brown sisters, like Get a Life, Danny Brown, and you know those had characters that were there was like neurodiversity, there was people who had other disabilities, and so those were like different people than I think I have seen presented in romances like for a long time. But like Krista was saying, I really enjoyed the fact that this had these two distinct storylines in it, because I really think that you got such a better story that way. And I'm just like really pretty into both what was going on with both characters.
Yeah, like last week, maybe the week before, NPR had a story on the culinary romance novel and how there's this new trend in romance, in very new romance novels, of moving into some sort of culinary space. And I happened to be in the car with my husband, and he was just like, who reads this many romance novels? I'm like, literally so many people read romance novels. And because it's so like gendered, and then because it's gendered, it's like denigrated as like a lower form of reading. Nobody wants to admit to reading so many romance novels. And I'm like, there's a reason there's a market. People aren't just writing them to throw them into the ether. And then we met up with a friend of mine, and she was like, he just happened to be away, and she was telling me about all these romance novels she was reading. I was like, oh, interesting. And all this to say, I think that there's become a lot more mainstream conversation around romance novels, especially as the plots diversify, the characters diversify, and more readers can see something of themselves. I've only started dabbling in romance, but I read, I think the author's name is Helen Hong. I can't remember if that's the right one. Yeah. And she has the series of Vietnamese and Vietnamese American love stories or romance novels. And they do tend to show both main characters' perspectives, but they're not as fleshed out as this one was. And I found that having a deeper background really made me want to root for them both to succeed in their lives together and their lives independently.
And it never felt forced. Like, it felt real. These were real characters with fully developed lives and careers.
Yeah, I agree. And I think also because they also developed the characters around these main characters, you know, like you learned about Katrina, her, you know, the silent partner in her business who had this whole other story. And then, you know, Samson had friends going through interesting things, like a new dad, and I think someone who'd recently been diagnosed or worried he had CT. So I think that helped make it seem like not forced, and like we're just getting these we're presented with their reality.
I also have to say, this is pretty much the spiciest book we've read in Unerased, which was a hallmark of the genre, but quite enjoyable. And I know that in the past, like, sex particularly was always like the last thing that happened in a romance novel to kind of round out the story. But I love that this is also a marker of the times we're in, where we don't have to wait for that for the marriage and then the sex and the purity idea, but that it is part of the story throughout, and so that's fun.
Yeah, I was actually a little surprised by that, because it's not something I see that often. 'Cause usually it's like, oh, will they, won't they? Well, they already did before the book even started. So, like, we know.
At night, in all caps. Yeah.
Yeah, and even when they're like reacquainting and they're like, fine, we're doing this thing together and we don't like each other, but can we also just have sex? Like, can we do that? But, so it was there throughout.
I really appreciate the selective communication.
Yeah.
We're gonna have boundaries, but like not actually like talk about what led up to our now like rekindled tension-filled romance, or I guess like energy. I was just curious, again, like especially for Krista, because you seem to maybe read more romance novels. But like, do you have any reactions to this being an interracial story that doesn't include a white love interest?
I didn't, but I have read them before. I thought it was pretty cool, because usually it is people of the same culture. So it was neat that they were from different cultures. Though not too much was made of that. I think it takes a long time for them to say that Samson is Samoan. So I wasn't really sure how to picture him. Whereas you find out what Rhiannon looks like pretty much up front. I mean, she's the person you start with. I mean, they are on the cover, but it's not the most detailed art on the cover. But I thought that was really neat. I just wish that they would have said more, like, sooner, just so I could picture him better.
I really appreciated that there wasn't this exoticizing of the characters just because they were characters of color. I think, Sheela, in the article that you sent out about steamy romance novels flush with color, I cringed at some of the quoted dialogue that was in the article, including things like those dark Latin eyes and stuff like that. I'm like, we didn't have that in this book, and I really appreciated it, because I think that would have just been, I don't know, that feels very icky to me.
Yeah.
Yeah. So to that point, I actually appreciated that the Samoan identity didn't come up until later, and more naturally. Yeah.
And then on the flip side of that, because there's so little Pacific Islander representation in literature writ large, let alone in romance, I was hoping that there'd be a little bit more like just contextual, natural or organic contextualizing, which unfortunately there wasn't, but I will take what I can get.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I don't read enough romance novels to have the full data set, but I really liked that it was interracial, intercultural, and there was a respect for that inherent in the writing.
Yeah, and his aunt too was white, but was with a Samoan man.
Exactly.
So they can be like leading men. You don't see that as often. And like one of my first boyfriends was Filipino American. So whenever I see like an Asian guy or Southeast Asian guys as like the romantic lead, I'm like, oh, like this makes me happy.
We have Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders have romance in their hearts as well.
Absolutely.
Well, I mean, the author, I think, she had a really hard time initially selling her books because publishers kept telling her that romances with non-white characters or POC characters wouldn't sell, and she's had to like struggle to get stuff published.
Wow.
Yeah, which is kind of ironic, but true. Yeah. You know, one thing that I didn't, and we've talked about this in the book club before, is like who gets to tell what story. And given that the author is not Black, not a Black woman, and not Samoan either, I don't think so, to write about characters who are not of that ethnicity. I was curious if anyone had any reactions to that, because we've previously read books like Joe IQ, that was where we very much had a reaction to it. And there was something about that book that spurred a reaction where maybe this one didn't. I'm curious.
I did wonder about the author's background, because I always do if there's a non-white character. And I didn't look her up too much, but I did find that interesting. And I did kind of wonder about that a little bit, what went into her choices.
Yeah, I definitely thought about it. I mean, I went to her website. I saw that she was not white, but not an African American either. And but I think these characters were written really respectfully. I would say there wasn't, as you were saying, Fatema, like this exoticizing of, so.
Yeah,
it didn't bother me.
Yeah, I also didn't have like a reaction to it. I just remember very distinctly having a reaction to Joe IQ, the mystery book that we read. And it was more along the lines of, I think it's the reliance on certain stereotypes and certain like references that I am personally like weary of when it comes from authors who are not Black, writing Black characters. And so I think because she didn't lean into any stereotypes, because of the way that she wrote with like fully fleshed out the character, I didn't have any reactions to it at all, which I think is how it should be done, and I respected her for that.
Yeah, especially when it came to, and this is a really small point, but the fact that Ree, who's a Black woman, is a founder of a dating app, which is in tech, and like Black women are like completely underrepresented in tech, underfunded in tech, and yet she, there is a lot of conversation about her grit and persistence in moving forward, and also recognizing all of the like both luck and hard work from her family. Like there's a lot of credit to her family for getting to her where she is. Mm-hmm. And that it felt very true to stuff I've read, or like the experiences of my Black female friends, especially from business school, being in corporate America, or thinking about going off and doing their own thing. And that type of attention to cultural influence details is like really, really powerful. And on the flip side with Samson, I really like that he was this affable guy who had to deal with like really traumatic situations with his family and his professional career, and how again, like I really wish there was a little bit more of culture infused or something infused to like distinguish his reactions a little bit more. But all in all, like everything was done in a way that if you know enough about that part of reality, you didn't feel weirded out by it.
Yeah, definitely.
One thing I did wonder about Ree's family is she talks a lot about her brother. And then when you finally meet him, there's like this passing comment that he was adopted. Did I miss something, or is that the only time she talks about it?
I think it's the only time she talked about it.
Because then it made me
I wondered
wonder
about that too. Yeah.
Wait. Maybe there's a future book that's about him. I don't know. But
Yeah, I do think this book was like the first. It was intended to be the first in a series. I think there was a second one that came out called like Girl Gone Viral, which is maybe about Katrina's story, which I think would be really interesting. But I would like, yeah, I wondered about that. It's just like this passing comment about Gabe's adopted. Like, would we get other stories about her family? I mean, there are really interesting stories. It seems that a lot of the characters have. But yeah, it's almost like why was the detail in there, except if there's not going to be some future mention of it.
Yeah, like I felt like there was clearly a story there that's near the end of the book, and it never comes up again.
Yeah. To be continued.
Yeah.
Well, I'm looking up Girl Gone Viral right now, and it seems like it's a standalone.
Oh, is it? I thought, well,
Yeah.
maybe she's writing a different book that was about Katrina, or maybe I just really wanted her to.
Oh, is the second one about can't think of her name, the character that was introduced at the very end that is going to move in with Katrina?
Maybe. No, okay, so it is about a
Oh.
Katrina. Yes, it is about Katrina.
Okay.
Yes, Katrina King Aurora, a Thai American, is a former supermodel who lives an extremely private life away from the spotlight. After she married her much older husband, Hardeep Aurora, she retired from modeling. And then it goes into her backstory.
Oh.
Okay.
That would be interesting because I don't even think it's like she led a reclusive life. It was more like she seemed, I mean, generally to have anxiety about leaving our house, like agoraphobic, you know, that.
Oh, that they go
I went,
into it.
you know, and I really liked that they went into that. And I really liked that there were other parts where she kind of like corrected Ree, you know, it was like, what if someone had, you know, an anxiety attack like the kind that I have, would you be judging them? And so I appreciated that was in this book, and I would like to know more about her. Just, you know, like, oh, I've been to 7 restaurants by myself in the past year, but I have to go to 10, you know, like those goals for her. And yeah, I thought her storyline was really, I wanted to know more about her.
And I'm reading the synopsis of Girl Gone Viral. It is very dark.
Wow.
Yes. I mean, there's like,
curious.
yeah.
I have to read that now.
Yeah,
I know, I want to read it.
Me too. I don't know what that says about us. They were like, oh, a dark storyline? Absolutely, sign me up.
Yeah, I felt like this one, I mean, there's some heavy stuff in there, but I wouldn't call it dark. Overall, I'd say it was pretty happy.
Yeah. It still delivers what you expect of romance novels. There's that slight bit of just like escapism and fluff in there, while still living in a very real world.
I really enjoyed the plot line or the story arc of them starting to like have to spend more time together, but it's to create content marketing. And I was just like feeling really stressed out on their behalf. Like, man, you guys have to like set up the schedule, do this after hours. For what? For like business? I was having a lot of feelings about that particular part.
Yeah.
I was impressed by Samson's ability to not have a car in Los Angeles.
Right?
I lived there for 3 months and I didn't have a car, and I relied on my roommate to get me everywhere. So I was like, where does he live?
Within walking distance of places. But if he'd had a car, then he would have no reason to, you know, be in her car.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, for all the steamy
Yeah.
scenes. Very cool.
I loved when they got honked at.
Oh man, that's funny.
Yeah, I had a question.
I also liked.
Oh,
Oh,
go ahead.
sorry.
No, please go ahead.
I was gonna say, I like the way that like their storylines had this interesting parallel too, which is, this is not about the car or anything, but I was just thinking like they both, you know, at different points, like had to stand up for something or had to, well, I mean, like Samson, that's why he ended his career, and, you know, having to make that decision about like, this is not right. I'm not gonna play. And then like for Rhea eventually to say, I have to come forth with this. And so though they happened in different ways, I kind of like that they both had this thing that they weren't gonna, that was gonna be something that, you know, that was like not something that they were going to turn back on. Or, I mean, it took Rhea definitely a lot longer to come forward with it, but once she did, you know, it's like, that's, she stuck with it. So it was just interesting.
I really enjoyed the like semi-fantastical competition at the end to basically vie for the business of the old school dating website. I mean, it felt a little bit out of place, but at the same time, like, why not?
Yeah, I would do that if I had that kind of money. Like, I love
some of my favorite lines. Yeah, some of my favorite lines were like when they were like, let's Charlie Bucket the fuck out of this whole situation, you know, like referring to Willy Wonka. Or I think like when the glitter comes out, she calls it the herpes of the craft world. And I just was like, yes.
Yes.
It's like just so true. So.
Yeah. Definite gems.
Yeah.
So Krista, because you spent a little bit of time in LA, I've never spent time in Southern California, so except for like a visit here or there. So I'm just curious if the geography made sense to you. I'm always curious how geography plays a role in your experience reading.
It did, because they did explain enough where things were that I could place them. I did kind of think, well, gosh, they get places awfully quickly. But also, I mean, you're not going to write about being stuck in traffic. But it was like when I think she was at Katrina's and then got into LA in an hour, and I'm like, how about that? Maybe 2 or 3 hours.
Well, you know how in Sex and the City, people say, oh, New York is the fifth character? I feel like for anything based in LA, traffic has to be the plus one.
Yeah, because it really is that bad.
That's like one of those things everybody just knows about LA, even if you haven't been there or spent time there.
No exaggeration.
It doesn't make it seem appealing. Like, I mean, I know it has a lot of great things, but like I'm going to move somewhere where I have to spend hours in like non-moving traffic.
I much preferred San Francisco. I was there for 2 years.
Yeah.
It was much easier to get around. The public transportation was better. And they do mention it a little bit in this book too. And that was very believable. I was like, yep, that sounds like the Northern Coast.
Meanwhile, I complained that I have to spend 50 minutes in my car between my house and Ann Arbor.
Yeah.
But like constantly going. Like I just have to keep, like, it's constant movement. But I'm like, oh, things are so far.
Yeah. It's funny how quickly you adjust to things. Because I mean, I've been back and forth between San Francisco and Los Angeles, and that's over a 5 to 6 hour drive in good traffic. And now if I have to drive an hour to Detroit, I'm upset.
Yeah.
Yep. So going back to the focus on dating apps, and I think we alluded to the fact that the company in the book crushes a similar backstory to Bumble, and so like have any of you thought about the pros and cons to the dating app business or app business or technology-based ones that are out there right now?
I've never used the apps. I'm sort of familiar with what's out there. I did meet my husband online through a website.
Oh,
Modern Age.
Hey, no. So this, this is basically like the subplot of the other dating service, and I would love to hear more about that. Like, what was it like? How do you, when you talk to your friends who are on apps now, how does it compare and contrast?
It seems to go so much faster on apps now, and they definitely address that in the book too, and even in the title. Dating is so much faster now, and like you can just get hookups. Like Regis, that's all she does, and she has no trouble doing it, and she has no shame doing it, which I loved. But it's like I was with Samson on a lot of it. I didn't really understand it and needed some things explained to me.
Yeah, I mean, I'm 50 years old, so when I've been married for like 23 years, and so we met like where we worked, but even thinking about that, and now like knowing more about these apps, and I'm just like, how did people meet? Like, how did we meet? How did we do that? It's just like the probability seems really small, and so you do see how like online dating or apps can open up the world, and that can be like a really good thing. It can also be kind of a dangerous thing. Like there's no you don't always know who it is, and I don't know, there's a lot of places where it seems like it could go wrong. I did like to think about, like, I haven't also thought about who is creating these apps really, and I did like to think about how an app created by a woman would be very different than maybe an app created by a man. Like her number one rule is like no unsolicited photos of parts.
What a diplomatic way to say that.
Yeah. And I was like, should I say it, or no, I won't.
Everybody knows.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, I've never received any, but my friends definitely have.
I was on dating apps for a while. Never received them. I think like my profile was aggressive enough that straight men were like, no thanks. And I was like, thank you. That's exactly the message I want to be sending to you. But I actually found that when I was in Ann Arbor, I was on Tinder and Bumble, and I found that on Bumble, even though there's like the safeguard of like heterosexual, like cis women make the first move, nothing really ever happened, because the expectation is for that to become a conversation, and like straight cis men are not great at conversations online. And it was just a weird thing to experience in real time. And now I'm learning that like people who are a lot of like undergrads and grad students at U of M are on Hinge now. And I was like, I have no idea what that is. I don't know like what the value proposition of that is. And there's a lot of emphasis, especially for femme presenting people, to still do a lot of background research on people that they might be meeting up with. The number of like TikToks or Instagram Reels giving you advice on how to look up the person you might be meeting is unreal. And it definitely matters because safety is a huge concern regardless. But then I think about like 50 years ago, where men could just lead like triple, quadruple lives, have families everywhere, and nobody would know.
Yeah.
And it's just like, it's wild. It's always wild out there in the dating world, but apps, like to Lucy's point, really bring up the intersection of like safety online and in person, and like how you present yourself.
Yeah, I was thinking a lot about the book Modern Romance, I think Aziz Ansari, and talking about how we went from proximity based, basically where you live and where you went is how you met people, to and who you knew, to like the world is yours, right? You can, the number of profiles I've seen on dating apps where like, I'm in San Francisco for a couple of days and looking to meet up with people, like it's just incredible. but I think that I feel like I've seen the full arc, going from the early days of Craigslist and OkCupid to now with all these options, both based on any sort of interest, whether it's like you're Christian and Muslim, whatever, looking for a very specific faith-oriented one, or it's like a very interest-specific one. And I think we've hit this point where the apps no longer feel like they are there to facilitate romance. It really does feel like they're there to keep you on the app and to profit off of you. And I'm surprised they didn't bring this up in any of the conversations around like the apps and why one app is better or stronger than the other. But the fact that so many apps have had to settle lawsuits around baiting men with fake profiles to kind of keep them in, right? Or traditional dating sites like I don't know if it was eHarmony or Match.com or one of the ones that basically cheated people out of money, saying like, oh, we have all these matches for you based on your profile, but they were fake profiles just to get people to pay a premium subscription to log on. And I don't know how many people I've spoken to who are like, yeah, I thought I was chatting with the real person that I matched on Tinder, Hinge, whatever, but it actually ended up being a robot. And that, as soon as they got my phone number, they started texting me about, blockchain and cryptocurrencies and trying to get my information that way. So it was just like, so there's a lot of stuff that's happening right now where this construct of dating app is really just evolving. And I think we're about to hit that precipice of like, what's next? And so I'm really curious about that.
That is all sorts of terrifying, intriguing from the outside, but you're like getting scammed while you think you're trying to meet somebody.
Yeah. And it's particularly targets men. I've noticed like these stories tend to be more common with men I've spoken to who've used dating apps, and they're like, yeah, I have no idea if who I'm talking to is real. And they present realistic enough that, I'm like, yeah, here's my number.
I just think that's like someone who is, I don't know, like you're putting yourself out there, you're making yourself vulnerable. Mm-hmm. It's not, it could be something that's really difficult for you to do. And then that's like, yeah.
Yeah, I can see having some trust issues after that.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So app sucks for men too, and for people in general. Just there's a whole host of reasons why it sucks.
Yeah. But like that really underscores the like brief conversation on ethics in tech or lack thereof. Mm-hmm. And I work in tech, and I've worked in tech for a while, and the company I'm at now is the first I have either been directly involved in or have experienced second or third hand that actively, constantly talks about ethical data usage, ethical data science, ethical constructs, like whatever like the underpinnings are to what we do. And I forget how uncommon that is, and especially in tech that is designed to bring people together, even though like that's been the biggest issue that we've seen in the last like 5-6 years.
There's a throwaway line in the book where Rhiannon is like, well, he was like, well, you could have looked me up, right? Using my data. You have my data, right? And she's like, yeah, but I didn't do that. And that was like a personal restraint and a pride thing, as opposed to this would be a really big ethical no. And the fact that, and then she was like, it's better if you don't know how much data I actually have on you, but it's like entirely personal, right? Her morality like is what keeps her from sharing out all these things. But if she had bendable morals in that way, I think that and I'm sure a lot of dating apps do, right? That there's a lot of risk, there's a lot of danger.
Yeah.
So I think very recently that it came out that the government has been buying data.
It came out like today or yesterday. Yeah.
That has been buying millions and millions of like dollars worth of data about everybody and everybody's activities and how it could be used to track undocumented people, to track all sorts of things. And it has no oversight from Congress or anyone else. It's disregarding all the privacy laws. And I find that to be absolutely terrifying.
Yeah,
But also like strictly in line with how we operate and how the reason tech companies want to be in the US is because they don't have to adhere by European data privacy laws, or they want to be in China or India where that data privacy laws are wildly different as well and not restrictive or pro-consumer. Yeah. Which I know is like a conversation for a nonfiction book, not for a romance novel, but the romance, like they bring it up. So
Yeah.
this is on the author, this deep, dark conversation.
yeah, and I was kind of glad to see that too, because yeah,
Yeah.
In look, like reading a little bit about her or on her website, she had some articles, and I think there was some. She had this tweet that went viral about she's on a date and the guy went in and bought like their coffee and came back with 2 cake pops, and she thought, isn't that so sweet? He got me a cake pop and he ate them both in front of her. And so she was just like, she tweeted about this and she got a lot of, people being like, wow, that's horrible, or support, but then she got so much horrible backlash and death threats and all this stuff. So I think, and I don't know if that's like some of the impetus behind the Girl Gone Viral book, but I think, that's not any data sharing or anything, but she has like some real experience with how quickly that world can turn, angry and mean and horrifying. So it was interesting to read that. Also, like, buy 2 cake pops and then you come back and you're like, I'm just going to eat these both in front of you. That's rude.
No, you eat that before you come back.
Right. Well, then she never knows, right? Like, yeah.
Yeah. I thought you were going to talk about the Romance Writers Association and the drama around that, because she had a very, a tweet that went viral for that as well. During like allegations of I think this was a while ago, but that particular group, one of the board members quit because of feeling like there's a lot of things around racism that was happening from the publishing group, and that someone who called out racism was then like let go and stuff like that. So there's a lot of stuff, drama happening with that. And so she had tweeted about that as well. But this is so fascinating.
I love that the author's tweeting. Like it just, you can see such an insight into authors' lives that we didn't used to have.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, the tweet itself is basically just asking the association to clarify and stand by their own code of ethics, which is like very insidery, but I really appreciate when writers are able to bring that to the forefront for people who might have a passing interest or people who are really interested in publishing, and demystifying that and kind of tearing down the gatekeeper mindset. And kind of going back to your earlier point, Fatema, about how Alisha wasn't able to get her book published for a very long time because publishing houses make this gross assumption that readers of color or white readers don't want to read characters who are also of color.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I find it more interesting because I get to, one, enjoy a great romance, or hopefully a great romance, but I also get to see insight into cultures that aren't mine. And how different cultures around the world view love and romance and courtship. It's really interesting and it's very different. So why would you not, I don't know, why would someone not want to read that?
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of like, I would think well, for me, like one of the points of reading, right, is to open up your world and your viewpoint. And so if you're just going to read, I don't know, in your world, then
Like, what's the fun in that? I already get to live my own life. I want to understand other people's lives.
I want to read a book about me.
Yeah.
I'm already stuck in my own head.
Yeah. Like I wish I could remember the name, but it was a few years ago. It was a Pakistani modern retelling of Pride and Prejudice.
Oh, yeah.
And it was so good.
Yeah.
Like, it was just fascinating. When she goes to the wedding, I was just like, this is so cool. I've never seen anything like this before.
Was it Unmarriageable?
Yes.
Mm. Yeah.
Yep.
She wrote that in a month, by the way.
No kidding.
Mm-hmm. She wrote that in a month for our final dissertation. It's amazing.
Good job.
I know, right? I was like, you have that story in you. And you like, push that out. Yeah. So what I'm hearing is like, there's a lot more romance for us to read and explore. And I'm really, we're just going to call July the spicy month at Unerased Book Club and start choosing fun books that way. Yeah.
Yeah, I want to thank Sandhya Krishnan, who's an Ann Arbor District Library patron and is an active member of our book club, for suggesting this book. That we, after last year, I guess, like, I was not good at reading the room in terms of order of books. So it was a really heavy summer book that we read. I was like, you're right. We should have something light for the month of July. So that's what renewed the interest in bringing in romance. And next month, we'll actually be reading, World of Wonders by Amy Nelukumatatil. Sorry, she has a long name. She's a poet based out of Ole Miss, so University of Mississippi, and it's a really great set of short essays tying together personal anecdotes with nature around her. And it's a slight departure from what we usually read in a really good way. So kind of keeping on that trend of something summery, light, and a little unique.
Yeah,
I would call this a beach read. This is a good beach read.
Yeah, a great beach read.
Okay.
So I'm glad you picked it.
Okay. We will not be reading the Girl Gone Viral next summer as a beach read. That feels more like a horror read.
I'm fascinated now with this departure.
I know we're all gonna go like get our hands on that book and read it immediately.
One of our book club members did email us, say she couldn't make it to the monthly meeting, but she's read both the second and the third book in the modern romance series that Alisha Rai had written. So she loved them all. So I think that's a good recommendation.
That's good to hear.
Yeah, I'll keep reading them. I like this one.
Yeah, I did too.
Yay. Our work is done. Cool. Well, yeah.
So we're at the top of the hour. Want to thank everybody for tuning in. Thank you, Krista and Lucy, for hosting and having a really great conversation about romance and all things scary in tech and dating. Very reassuring for people who are out on those apps.
Sorry about that.
Yeah. Well, and thank you both for bringing this book to us and also for facilitating the conversation. It was fun and interesting as always.
Cool. All right.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
See you next month.